who then took one look at me and said, "You look so young, your business isn't going to be around in the next 6 months. I'm not going to even bother putting you in my catalogue because you're not going to be around long enough for me to do a reprint."
How little did they know?
How little did they know?
My guest today is co-founder of Little Moons, Vivien Wong. Little Moons experienced an astronomical growth off the back of a viral TikTok, which immediately made the brand a household name.
We had people queuing up outside of Tesco's at 7 a.m.
What was it like behind the scenes?
I can only describe it as chaotic.
And as with most things, despite the title of this episode, there's no such thing as overnight success.
Kitted the factory out, moved in January 2020, and COVID hit like 2 months later.
In this episode, Vivien shares the lessons she learned while building Little Moons.
I think luck is where opportunity meets preparedness. It's a massive risk. This new building was 30,000 square foot.
That is crazy. You took this huge bet and it all worked out.
You don't rise to the level of your ambitions. You fall to the level of your systems.
Before we go into the episode, please hit subscribe wherever you're listening or watching this on. Welcome to Unboxed. I'm your host, Connie Nam, the founder of Astrid and Miyu. In these conversations, I speak to founders, investors, and creators who are all breaking boundaries in their space to discover the person behind the brand and what it took for them to build their empires. Hey, Vivien, welcome.
Hi, Connie. Thanks so much for having me.
No, thanks for coming. Yeah, I'm so excited. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are aware of Little Moons and they're a fan, as is my household, my entire family, including my kids. They're obsessed with Little Moons. But can you tell me a bit about yourself, Vivien Wong? Who are you as a person?
Who am I? I think I came from quite an entrepreneurial family, so I don't think it's surprising that I went into starting my own business. But I did, I guess, go to very competitive girls' school in North London. I left feeling distinctly average as a result of that, but it was always driven into me that you had to succeed, you had to get good grades. And then I went on to become a chartered accountant, and then I went to work for Barclays Capital after that. But it just didn't set my world alight. And so that's how I ended up starting a business with my brother.
Yeah, our experiences are so similar, as is with a lot of like good Asian girls, right? I went to a super competitive school. I felt a bit average because I was like sometimes top of class, but most times bottom of class as well in this like super competitive environment. And then I went into investment banking, which is a very competitive environment as well. And that never energized me. Like if finance was never a thing, that's why I started. So we have very like similar parallel paths going on.
And it's interesting you use the word energize. I use that a lot. And so I could do the work, but it just didn't set my world alight. And I always thought, I want to do something that interests me, excites me, something that I get up looking forward to do every day. And entrepreneurialism or running your own business just really suited my skill set, that it was so varied. You sometimes have to do a bit of spreadsheet stuff, but it can also be creative, and it's very people and product focused. And it's that tangible day that I really like, rather than sort of like, I don't know, working out derivatives or something like that, which to me it's not real.
Yeah, you do it if you have to,
yeah,
but it doesn't energize you.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what sparked you, and what was the catalyst in starting, quitting your corporate job and starting the business?
I think it was on many levels that led me there. And so my mum had always told me, because I think she had suffered prejudice growing, having a baby in the 70s. She felt that people judged her that she wasn't working hard enough as a mother, and we didn't have the same sort of employment laws back then. And so she always said, like, learn how to play piano, because if no one wants to employ you because you've had a baby, you can teach piano, or become an accountant because they'll always need accountants. It's a skill. You could do it from home. And
so did she have a corporate job before she started her own business?
She didn't have a corporate job, but she did work for someone. She was actually a buyer in fashion.
Oh,
and
wow.
Then when she left Malaysia to come over to the UK to marry my father, she worked for a fashion business that was based in Hampstead. But it was tough having a baby. When I was sick, she had to say she was sick. People were less understanding of the,
It was a completely different world back then.
Completely different. And I think her lessons in life that she taught me were born from her experience. And so therefore, I did my chartered accountancy, something I could do from home as a bookkeeper if I needed to. And I guess the irony is I ended up not having children. So I'd set up a life that could have set me up to easily have kids, and it never happened. When my mum started a bakery from home, and just making delicious cakes that she'd missed from Malaysia for my father, and they missed their good food. And so growing up, we helped them in their bakery every summer holiday, every weekend. And I could see the passion that they had for the business, how much care they put into the recipe. And that really shaped my life. And when we sat across the dinner table, we always talked about business. They didn't talk at us about business. I could just hear them in the background just discussing work, what to do, all of these different things.
Yeah, so it was always deeply ingrained in you.
Really deeply ingrained. And I just love the passion that they had for it. I wouldn't come home and talk about work because it didn't energize me, it didn't excite me. And so as the business grew and as I was working in an investment bank, more and more restaurants were asking my mom to help with recipe, and it wasn't something that came easily to her. But I found it really exciting, and I started sort of looking around thinking there are a lot of Japanese restaurants here. In Canary Wharf, there was a big Yo Sushi, Itsu on every corner. It was becoming more acceptable to eat sushi. Like when I was growing up, chopsticks, no one knew how to use chopsticks. Raw fish was, just everyone thought it was a bit weird. Noodles were worms when I was at school. And so it was really nice that the whole culinary world was opening up. And so I'd go to these Japanese restaurants and the desserts were, I don't know, green tea muffin or green tea brownie. They weren't exciting desserts.
And they weren't real Asian.
And so my parents used to make traditional mochi in their bakery. And cut a long story short, we tried mochi ice cream in Japan, we tried it in America, but we thought we could make it better. The ice cream quality wasn't great. And so we being my brother and I, sort of thought we could do this better one day. And it was always one day. And then in 2004, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And it really made me realize how short life is. Really got to seize the day. And that made me putting the wheels in motion to make this a reality. So I kind of made a list. What would I do? What do I want to do before I die? It sounds morbid, but I think it's a good way of living life. It really makes you prioritize things. The first thing was set your own business up, and the second one was to get a dog, something that I wouldn't have been able to do working in the city. I'd made the decision, and we started thinking, how can we make this happen? So I left my job first, because there's no point my brother and I ruining our careers at the same time. And so I started, I think, for 2 years.
And he was in finance as well.
He was in finance. He worked for JP Morgan. He stayed at JP Morgan. I left for 2 years. I did the recipes with my father. It took a while to sort of grow it, and we found some real business, some real customers that came in. I think Yo Sushi was one of our first customers, and they were, a very solid customer. And it looked like we actually could build a business out of this. So then my brother left the business and we started doing it together.
And how do you split your roles between you and your brother?
To begin with, we didn't split the roles, and it was a disaster because things would fall through the cracks. I thought he was doing it, he thought I was doing it, an argument would ensue. And so it became clear that as the business grew, we had to split our roles up. And we very early on got a non-executive director, a Ned, to come and sit with us on our board. So it was just the three of us. Very, very casual. But he suggested that we do a personality test. So we did an insight test, which changed our relationship massively. It just highlighted how different we were. He was, the complete opposite of me. And I think that's why we've done so well together, because we have very different complementary skill sets.
And that awareness and appreciation is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think we understood each other better, we respected each other better, and we worked a lot better together. So in the end, he looked after sales and marketing, I looked after operations, supply chain, finance, and that's how we split our roles up.
What are the pros and cons of working with a sibling? Do you think that's very similar to working with a partner or a romantic partner?
I wouldn't be able to do it with a romantic partner. I think my brother and I moved in together to try and save some money, and we just talked about work constantly. There was just no off button. We'd come home and start talking about it in the kitchen, and it was just too much, far too intense. With my brother, we trust each other implicitly. We've always been really close. And of course you can argue with a sibling. I'm not gonna lie, we don't argue. We do argue, but we'll never stop being business partners, because we'll never stop being siblings. At the end of the day, I think you can stop being business partners, you can stop being friends, but we were always going to be brother and sister. So I guess in a respectful way, you argue, but you move on from it. And then, big argument, then I'm making myself tea. Do you want a tea? And you sort of become, you have to get on with it. And I think trust is really important when you're looking for sort of a co-founder. And then I'd say complementary skill sets are also really important when you're trying to find a business partner. And also, your concept of hard work is very different to someone else's concept of hard work. And what you're looking for from the business might be very different to your business partner. So I think you should have a very open and honest conversation to begin with, just to check that your expectations are aligned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your life trajectory needs to align as well, right? If someone needs to take it easy, like one person might want to take it easy, get some cash flow, and another person might want to sell the business very quickly, then that's not a marriage.
Absolutely.
And I see a lot of co-founders fail because they haven't discussed all of these things up front.
My brother and I actually didn't write a shareholders agreement up until 12 years later in the business.
Oh, wow.
When we were looking to sell.
Recent.
Well, yeah, until we were looking to get external investors on board, because there was no need to do all of that paperwork.
Yeah.
I mean, I would 100% advise someone to do that much earlier on. But because we have that trust between us, we didn't need to do it. But if it's not a family member, I think you should definitely get it written down.
Yeah. And it sounds like Little Moons, the inspiration came from your parents' bakery and what you've seen.
Yeah.
Did you leverage a lot of the things that they have built because they were making their own, I guess, cakes and sweets? Did you leverage their manufacturing facilities or their know-how?
I leveraged their passion and how my mum used to make her cakes. And so she would make her own coconut milk, for example, instead of like mixing up from powdered. She'd get fresh coconuts, she'd get fresh pandan leaves, and she'd squeeze the juice out to make her pandan cakes. And so I learnt that quality of product from her, real provenance of making things well. We did leverage their factory. We got a small corner, which we're very lucky. So we did have a facility that we could start making mochi ice cream from to begin with. But it was, it wasn't a proper place to make it. There was no door for a forklift truck, for example. So we need to borrow a forklift truck from our neighbor. But yeah, we were very lucky that our parents had a bakery.
Yeah, and you still run all of your manufacturing in London, don't you?
Yeah, we do. We manufacture every Little Moon from our factory in West London.
That's incredible.
It's always been that way. I did speak to a very well-respected business owner very early doors, and he said to me, don't bother with your own manufacturing, spend all of that money on marketing. And I cannot fault him on that, like absolutely true. However, there was no one that made mochi. There was no co-manufacturer to make mochi. No one knew how to make it. And I don't think I could have convinced someone to have given me space in their factory because I didn't know what the market was going to be like. It was a completely unknown category, a completely unknown product. If we were forced into it, we had to make it ourselves.
But in hindsight, this probably gives you a moat, right? Because no one can replicate this because this is your own recipe that you completely protect.
Yeah, I agree. Even though it was so painful, and if we look back, it gave us the margins as well. So we could have more margins to reinvest in the business because we were self-funded for the first 12 years. Manufacturing our own products definitely gave us that advantage.
But that's in hindsight, I guess. If you were to do it again, would you do that? Like manufacturing your own products?
With hindsight, again, I knew there was no one else that could make it. If I could, potentially, because there was a lot of headaches. But actually, when we started growing really quickly, I've also heard from my other friends who do co-manufacture. Those co-manufacturers don't care as much as you, so maybe you still wouldn't have got the office, the factory space, the line time. My 100% focus was on Little Moon, so I moved heaven and earth to make that happen in our factory. And I think it's difficult to get that commitment from a co-packer.
Yeah, that's incredible. And tell me about your early years, because you self-funded it. You had manufacturing facilities and you were selling to restaurants. Like, what was that like? And also, you raised no money up until recently, right?
Yeah, we started really small. And I think we had the privilege of having a very slow growing market, if I'm honest, if I can put it that way. If you have a lot of competition around, I think you're forced to act a lot quicker than we did. So we grew the mochi market, I think, for the first 5 years very slowly. We only supplied restaurants because we knew the market wasn't ready. The grocery market wasn't ready for mochi. We went to chefs to begin with because we know that they are more forward-thinking when it comes to food. They have an appreciation for different products. And so
they know what mochi is.
They know what mochi is. And a lot of them would, firstly, we targeted the Japanese restaurants. And of course, those chefs have an appreciation for it. But before we went to the chefs, I guess, I also went to the distributors who then took one look at me and said, you look so young. Your business isn't going to be around in the next 6 months. I'm not going to even bother putting you in my catalogue because you're not going to be around long enough for me to do a reprint. And so that's...
How little did they know?
How little did they know? So that's why I went to the chefs, and the chefs wanted the products. So the chefs convinced the distributors to say, please put them on your books because I want you to distribute these products to me. And that's kind of how we got started, very slowly. Firstly, just a couple of Japanese restaurants. Yo Sushi was our largest customer to begin with. And they were a really good, solid company, paid us on time, like the same order every week. So we could plan it.
Yeah.
And it was a really nice way to practice manufacturing.
They seem like a really good company because I have a friend who has a yuzu drink business, and his biggest buyer is Yo Sushi, and he said they're like amazing for him.
They were amazing. They were super supportive of us. So yeah, they're a great company, and they've also, I think they were started by a founder who grew it. I think he left and then he came back, and I think that he brought the soul back into Yo Sushi and grew it.
Yeah, that's always the case, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which we'll touch upon later. But now you're everywhere in supermarkets. I see you everywhere. I see you also in Paris. When did that happen? When did that pick up?
So we started exporting really early on in our journey as part of food service. So we started doing food service in the UK. We heard about, the same sort of exhibitions that you could do in France and Germany and the Middle East. And so we had to expand the market because it was small. And so we started exporting really early on. And so that's where we had, I guess, the route to market and the know-how of how to export. And so when we did develop the retail brand that you see today, when we launched it in the UK, we then thought, well, why not launch it across the European markets as well? Because we had the route to market.
And you went viral during COVID.
Yes.
Tell me more.
So just to wind back a bit, so you understand how much pressure the business was under when it happened. So this is where my brother and I have discussions, right? So we had a 5,000 square foot factory. So we'd moved out of our parents' bakery. We'd moved into a smaller facility that was built just for our business. And it was 5,000 square foot, which isn't huge. And we grew to about, I think, 7 million in that building. And we really needed to move to a larger building if we were going to grow. However, it's a massive risk. This new building was 30,000 square foot. Our rent was going to go up from something like 45,000 a year to 500,000. Anyway, I said, Howard, we've got to do this. And he's like, what if we bankrupt ourselves? And we're like, I know, it's an absolute risk. And eventually he agreed. And so we moved into our new building, having spent 3 million on kitting it out in January 2020.
That's really ballsy. If you were turning over 7 million, that's almost half of your total revenue.
It might have been it might have been a bit more. I think maybe 10 million.
Yeah, or maybe 30%, 40%.
Yeah, it was a big increase. So we spent this much money, kitted the factory out, moved in January 2020, and COVID hit March 20, 2 months later. And so that was a massive stress, worrying about cash flow. We just didn't know what was going to happen.
Wow.
And also Brexit was going to happen at the end of that year as well. So there was a lot of competing.
Yeah, it was stressful times.
Really stressful times. The main thing was getting everyone safe in our building. So we sort of furloughed everyone when that came through. Then when the grocery stores stayed open, we could continue sort of supplying them, but the restaurant trade was completely closed off. So that was 50% of our turnover at that point. And so in December, when Brexit was going to happen, we thought we're going to move all of our stock over to Europe because then it'd be easier to distribute from there. We knew there was going to be some real export headaches post the 31st of December. And then I think the first week of January, we started going viral on TikTok. And we had no stock in the whole country because we thought we've got 3 months to build up stock before the summer, March buy-in, April buy-in. Didn't have that time to build up
was
stock.
Was there a particular post or was it multiples of posts that you posted on TikTok?
So
what happened there?
We didn't post it. I'd love to say that we were geniuses and I could write a book about it, but it wasn't us. It was a completely organic post by someone who said she was going on an adventure to a big Tesco's to look for little moons. And for some reason, it just captured TikTok's algorithm. We were on everyone's For You page. Everyone thought, this is so exciting. I guess it was the only permissible adventure you could go on during COVID. You could only go to the supermarket legally. And so everyone started doing this. And prior to that happening, though, we'd been on TikTok since 2019. So we were real early adopters of TikTok. And we've just been messing around on it because I think we're quite curious as a company. We're like, what's new? Be Real came on. I joined that myself personally and then realized that, it wasn't something for me either. So I like trying out new things. We had a junior in the marketing team who then started making these videos and we just have a laugh about them on the team, silly dances we'd all done. And then one morning she phoned us in the team meeting and she said, I think there's something happening. We've got like 1,000 views on our page. And we were like, oh, that's interesting. Anyway, moving on to, I don't know, COVID stuff. And then the next day
Feels like ages ago.
It was, it was a lifetime ago to me. And then the next morning she goes, guys, I think something's happening. I think we've had like 10,000 views, and it just kept growing. And it was like 100, then 200. And it was just 100,000. And then in the end, we had 500 million views of hashtag Little Moons.
Wow.
And so as part of that journey, we started getting phone calls from Tesco saying, we're completely out of stock. Can you, instead of our normal order, can we order just pallets and pallets of our flavors? We had people queuing up outside of Tesco's at 7 a.m. We had Tesco employees hiding Little Moons under packs of like chips or fish fingers.
Oh, I love that. Do you have content? Did you capture content?
Yeah, we did. I saved it. Like there were some really funny videos coming through. And there was a guy, you know how hip hop videos, you've got guys like sort of like throwing cash over themselves. He was like throwing boxes of Little Moons on himself. It was really amusing. I think that's exactly why TikTok's so fun. And but then behind the scenes, we couldn't make enough. So our factory was, I guess, halved in size because people couldn't stand close to each other because we're very manual as a business. Everything is pretty much made by hand, and we had to separate everyone. We had to get loads of conveyors.
But it's good that you moved into this factory. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to take advantage of all this demand.
Exactly. And so when people say that, you know, you're really lucky to go viral on TikTok, I completely agree. But I think luck is where opportunity meets preparedness, and we were able to capture that wave and grow with that. I guess the zeitgeist that was presented
is crazy.
To us.
You made this huge. You took this huge bet, and it all worked out. How much do you think is, I guess, a combination of like you knowing what was going to happen versus luck?
I had no idea we were going to go viral. Like building that factory was just like my forever factory. We were never going to move out. That was enough capacity to last us a lifetime. In my business plan, I didn't think we'd ever need to move again. So I had no idea.
Yeah.
And that's
did you have to move since from that factory? Or
we have now got another factory that we're opening in the Midlands because rents in Park Royal are crazy.
Yeah.
We've moved to a different location. But no, we couldn't have planned it. And I think that's entrepreneurialism. You've got to go with your gut. Sometimes that move potentially might not have made sense on a spreadsheet, but then your gut feel is that I think we're on the cusp of something. Like we absolutely had to move out of our last factory because it was far too small. And I guess that's just you roll the dice, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And I think we're really lucky that we'd moved when we did.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And what was that fast growth like, that viral moment? I know it was fantastic for demand and customers, but what was it like behind the scenes?
I can only describe it as chaotic. It was the best of times, but it was the worst of times. So we were getting all the supermarkets that we'd been trying to get listed into calling us, asking to list us. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so if we wanted to order more products, we couldn't because no one was really working in the factories. There was a supply chain crisis, so we couldn't get more flowers. There was no containers coming over from Europe for packaging or anything like that. We couldn't really get more of the teams in because we had to segregate everyone. And we couldn't order more machinery to make it because all the machinery companies were closed. So it really was down to our team managing, working through the night, over 7 days, pulling together and just getting through it. And I think there were definitely some tears behind the scenes. There was a lot of stress, lots of sleepless nights. But the only way that we got through it was thanks to our team. And I think I was reading this book by James Clear during that time, and it's called Atomic Habits. And there was one line that really resonated with me whilst in that book, and it says, you don't rise to the level of your ambitions, you fall to the level of your systems. And what failed us, not failed us, the pain point for us was our systems. We had the systems of maybe a £5 million business. We were like reaching 27. And so we couldn't keep, like supply chain just couldn't keep up. We didn't know how to order. We couldn't cope with ordering that number of pallets. Like before, we were maybe ordering 5 pallets a week. We now had to order like 50, and where that was coming from and how to manage it and where to store it. So it was definitely our systems that let us down. And we didn't have an HR team either. We didn't have anyone in HR.
How many people did you have at this point?
I think about 60 when we went viral on TikTok. We only had 60, and that's manageable because you're bringing on new people, like maybe 2 a week or something. So you can do contracts, you can train people up really easily. We didn't have any SOP systems, which is standard operating procedures to plan, to train, or anything like that. So it was really painful behind the scenes. And if that's my lesson, if I could go back again, I would make sure that we had all of this set up, that everything was written down, that it's not just all in people's heads. And maybe have someone from HR so that it was not our head of sales sending out furlough letters. And it was definitely our systems that made our growth a lot more painful.
And how did you expand the team since? I'd imagine you'd have to had hired loads of people thereafter.
So we hired so many people so quickly. We started 2020, I think, with 60 people. At the end, we had 400. And so at one point, we had one existing member of staff for every 4 new people.
Wow.
And it's really hard to...
How did you manage all the onboarding? Did you have HR by this point?
Well, we did have HR at this point, but we didn't have the processes in place to train everyone. Because usually you just get one new person and they can just, I don't know, follow someone around for a week and they learn the ropes. But we had to onboard people so quickly.
Yeah, and they're all new.
Yeah, and that really impacts the culture as well, because culture is what you live and breathe. Yeah. If you've got like 3/4 of your staff are new and they don't live and breathe your culture, it does change it somewhat. Yeah. So that was difficult to manage.
What was the specific difficulty and how did you manage that? Or like, is it still in transition, or did you like fully manage it now?
I think we've definitely brought it back to our culture. But when you have that many people starting, I guess it's like food started going missing from the freezer because there were so many people. Whereas before they were all your friends, you kind of knew who left, whose cup was whose. Like all the freezers were, all the fridges were fine. There was somewhere to eat lunch, and then it got so rammed that, you know, I guess it wasn't such a gentle, relaxing culture in our factory. And we've always...
Because it's hard to build trust that quickly, right?
Yeah, and all these people don't know. They've just come into chaos, basically. They saw everything that was wrong with Little Moons internally, that we didn't have all these processes in place. Whereas the guys that had been with us for many years just saw the good in Little Moons and how we'd grown. And I think that was the clash of culture. Yeah. And so it took some time to fix that.
Yeah. And how did you manage those two cultures? Did you have to manage that, or did you have to, I guess, manage some people out, or what happened there?
I think it was just about not only educating them on how to make mochi, for example, it was teaching them about our culture as well. Yeah. And on the onboarding, if you just say it, then it can just go through people like, these are our values. It'll go in one ear and they'll go out the other. You have to live it. You have to see it happening. You have to see that everyone's being respected. Yeah. Our factory workers are actually called movers and makers because I very much want my team to understand that they are the engine room of our business. It's where I started my career. I started working on the shop floor, and they should have just as much respect as everyone we have in the office. And I think I've been in businesses before where you sort of look down on those guys who are working in the warehouse or something. I didn't want that at all. And so everyone that works in our office at Little Moons are called supporters because we support the guys that are making the mochi.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Cultural references like that, I think, take time for new people to realize how we live and breathe the values.
Did you find that you needed different types of people as you grow?
Absolutely. I think that was one of the most difficult things. As we grew so quickly, we had the most fantastic team in place, you know, doing the day-to-day. And sometimes the people that are working for you when you're a £10 million business just don't have the experience to grow a company from, 10 to 50 million in 2 years. It's a very different skill set. Yeah. And so as part of that journey, you know, we did have to bring new people on, people above heads of before, and I think they would have expected to have been promoted. And so that sort of churn and saying goodbye to some really cherished members of staff was just very difficult.
Yeah. And what are the key skill set of earlier employees and key skill sets of current employees?
I think if you're going to join a startup, you just have to be ready to do everything. My job when I first started, particularly with this self-funding mindset, is that you do everything. I used to enter invoices onto Sage every Sunday afternoon because I wanted to save that 25,000 a year to pay a bookkeeper to do it. And so when you join a startup, that's what you do. I think I mentioned before, our head of sales was also writing furlough letters. So ultimately he was head of HR as well. And everyone just sort of mucked in. Like if we needed to hand out flyers, everyone went out to hand out flyers. Everyone helped with marketing. Everyone went to man our stand at Taste of London. Everyone just gets stuck in with everything. And I think with that is fun, and not everyone can and wants to do that. But I've definitely seen it shift as we've got larger as a business, that specialisms come in and people are less willing to sort of muck in. And they shouldn't really have to either, because it just draws away from their ability to be really efficient at what we need them to do.
Yeah.
But it definitely changes as your
it's
business
hard,
grows.
isn't it, managing that change and growth?
Yeah.
How did you manage that?
I think it takes some time, some getting used to. I think the biggest shift came when we got investment from our PE house. They brought on a whole new sort of rigor to the way that we presented figures, how we talked about figures. They wanted a lot more structure in the business. So marketing did marketing. Marketing didn't go and help with HR letters and things, and that's absolutely the right thing to do as you grow. And it taught us a lot.
It also gets very confusing, right? If you have different departments and people are bucking in.
Completely. Yeah. And so it was good that everyone had accountability for their work. That was a growth for me as well, because I had to change as well. You have to evolve as a founder with the business. And it's just been a complete journey. I remember when we first hired our first senior leadership team, and I think this was when we were about 5 to 7 million. And that team, we did so much together. I feel very close to them because we went through so much. But when they came in, I remember speaking to my executive coach and asked her, well, what's my role now? We've got a head of marketing, a head of sales, head of finance, head of operations. Where do I fit into this? Like, I can't do this job better than any of them. We found our way. There was obviously bits that I could bring to it.
Yeah. But how did you find your way? I went through a very similar journey. I think it was 2019 when I started looking for a specialist. I felt a bit redundant, which is like so weird as founders. Now looking back, like that was such a stupid, I guess, worry.
Yeah.
But I wasn't doing stuff anymore, and that made me really nervous.
Yeah. And then I realized that doing isn't necessarily what brings value to the business. Perspective, time to think, and then that strategy, which isn't on your to-do list.
Yeah.
But it's so important for the business. And I think that gave me time to step away from the day-to-day to then dream, to think about new flavors, think about marketing, think about lots of different sort of strategic things.
Yeah. I think it's also the energy, right? The positive energy you can bring to the table. If you're tired because you're doing things all the time, you can't show up as your best self to motivate your team.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of founders don't realize this point.
Yeah. And that was another thing, I guess, when we were going through the rapid growth, everyone's turning to you for answers. And sometimes you don't have the answers, but they're looking. So you have to bring the confidence.
Yeah.
So when everything's
you have
falling
to have
apart,
composure, anyways, to ask the right questions.
I think that's right.
To give people confidence.
It is composure. You turn up with a smile on your face, even though you're completely broken inside. Because if your team see you like that, I think they would start to lose confidence as well. And so that's absolutely it. That was my role. That was bringing everyone together and saying, right, we've got this. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So that was, I guess, the first time I had my sort of breakdown in confidence as such.
At what point was this? Was this when the private equity came in?
No, this was in 2018. We brought in our first senior leadership team. And then when we got the private equity join, the business sort of changed. It was another step change again. And so we then, during the last 2 years, have really, I guess, upgraded our executive team. And then again, you've got to find your place. You've got to find where you add value. And then earlier this year, when our last CEO stepped down from his role, I had to step in as interim CEO. And I've never led a business as large as this before. I've never managed a team who are as high caliber as my executive team are. And so that's another time where you've got to really sort of lean into it and think.
Yeah, tell me more. You hired a CEO and then you had to step back in.
Yeah.
It sounds like a Steve Jobs story.
He came in with our private equity and did a brilliant job over the 2 years. But I think it was just a nice time for us to part ways, because culturally I think it wasn't working as well. And so I had to step in I've been doing it for 5 months now. And a lot of support from my executive coach, a lot of support from my executive team. So I spoke to all of them, really frank, open conversations. What do you need to do this? You know that we've got a new CEO starting in June. Next 4 months, what are we doing? And so we just worked together. And I've realized that being a CEO is really just about bringing the team together and making sure that you're greasing the wheels, that all the heads of departments are working together and all the departments are working as one team.
And isn't it very refreshing to have a mature executive team as well?
I couldn't have done it without them. They're all brilliant. And I can say that because I would tell them all to their face as well, and I have done that. I couldn't have done it without them.
I know you're hiring a new CEO What were the biggest lessons learned from the previous appointment?
I think that you have to get a CEO that gets your values and your culture. I think it matters so much to Little Moons that people are valued. The brand is a brand that we're growing, and that your CEO has to get that and has to understand that we need to invest in things like that. And some CEOs are, I guess, more sales-led, some might be more finance-led, and so they don't give you the investment for marketing, or, there's so many different types of CEO. And I didn't interview our first CEO because he came in with our private equity partners. But when I started meeting lots of CEOs for our second CEO, it blew my mind how skillful so many people were in very different ways. Some came up from the marketing route, and just the energy that they bring to the business is very different. And so you just have to make sure you know what your business needs, because it could be that your marketing team's really strong. So you might not necessarily need a CEO that has that strength, but they have to understand the importance of marketing. So I think that's why there's a place for everyone, because you need to look at how they fit into the team as a whole.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because the CEO role is not a cookie cutter role.
No.
It's not like a finance director. It's not like a merchandising director. It really depends on what the business needs are and what their strategy is.
Yeah, but I think they just have to be really good at leading people.
I agree. What is one message you would send to an early stage founder?
So my one piece of advice to an early stage founder is to really trust your instincts, because I didn't have the confidence to trust my instincts at many points during the journey, and I wish I had listened to my instincts. I think one was moving into the new factory, but you're going to have so many people advise you and tell you to do different things, but stick to what you think is right. Listen to the experts, but ultimately you're going to have to make the decision. That's the same as listening to the other expert who said to us, don't set up your own manufacturing team. And I understand why he said that, but it really has kind of become one of our pillars of success. So definitely trust your instincts.
Yeah, I completely agree. Take in what you can, but you're the only one who has the vision and the context over the full business.
Where have you followed your instinct before?
Like always, I've always followed my instincts. And whenever I didn't, it always went wrong.
Right.
So I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it requires a lot of confidence, though, from the founder, right? Especially when you're young. It requires a lot of experience and a lot of failures through by not following your instinct to realize this.
As you go through your journey as a founder, you constantly have to learn. So that instinct, I knew I should have followed it. Or sometimes you should have followed someone else's advice. And I think it's like a muscle, isn't it? It's learning that. Same as resilience. Like you just constantly have to practice it. Have that time out to rethink it and just learn for the next time.
And I think once you do it over and over again, you just get it,
yeah,
don't you? Once you've run it for like 12 years, like us.
Is that how long you've run it for 12 years?
12 years. Yeah. You've done it for 12 years as well?
I've done it for 14 years.
Oh, wow.
And it's interesting because people think we're an overnight success.
But you're not.
We're not. We've been doing it for a really long time. And I think one of your other guests, I think it was Tom from Thomas Cubitt, said, you need strong foundations. I really believe that. Like we took our time to learn our business, to craft our product, so we knew everything about it from start to finish. And I think that's held us in really good stead.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, thank you so much, Vivien. That was so inspiring.
Thank you.
So fun.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. You can follow me at Connie Nam, Astrid and Miyu at Astrid and Miyu, and the Unboxed Instagram page at unboxed_founder confidential. See you next week.